Hey guys, my name's Khadroth, and today we're going to be talking about Phantasmoon. Basically, Santa Arcueid, as we have taken to calling her. She's actually technically not a Santa unit, but it is what it is. She's essentially Magical Girl Arcueid or Christmas Arcueid, depending on how you want to think about it. But basically, E-Girl Arcueid, as she is in her second form, Streamer Arcueid, is going to be a very interesting addition to the game. Now, she is a limited unit coming out with the week-long event that we have here that is basically our second Christmas event that's going to have a raid. Now, she's going to be coming to us right here before New Year's, so a lot of people may be on the lookout for whoever is going to instead be the New Year's servant, and so they might opt to skip her. However, again, you only have this 1 week to roll for her. She will probably come back at a later date with future banners, but given the limited nature and the fact that she is somewhat of a collab unit, I would not expect that to be very frequent. So we'll just have to see how often they do want to bring her back, especially with how they treat original Arcueid in that regard. Now, what Phantasmoon here is going to be is she is going to be a single target buster based pretender. Now, this is very strong given the fact that she's an SSR because we basically don't have a single target SSR pretender in the game until her here. So with her coming in, she's representing an upgrade in terms of something that the game has never had. We have had a Hephaestion who's been very serviceable. She's been a permanent unit and she does have 100% charge. But admittedly, having Arcueid being more buster synergistic and having a little bit more firepower in terms of the actual carding capability as well is definitely something to pay attention to. Let's start out though here first by going ahead and talking about Arcueid's raw stats. So you can see here right off the rip that she has already just a very high attack power stat. This is going to be 12.4k. It's not in the 13k range, but this is definitely in the upper echelon of units and something that is very nice to see, especially on a unit that's going to be doing a lot of carding. The downside here is going to be that she's absolutely anemic when it comes to HP for a 5-star, but this is just going to be something that you're going to have to learn to live with. I think this will be made a little bit worse if you're trying to run her alongside Double Koyanskaya. So keep in mind that if you are doing her in some sort of, Double Koyanskaya setup for farming or something like that, yeah, you'll probably be fine unless you somehow mess up and the enemy ends up with an ability to hit you and then maybe kill your Arcueid, but otherwise you'll probably be okay. It's more in challenge content that you're really going to want to watch out for this sort of thing, or if you're trying to somehow, let's say, solo with her, which may be something that people want to do due to her unique carding mechanics. She is Star Attribute, which is at least relatively unique in that sense. And again, taking a look here, she has 104 star absorption, a little bit higher than your average pretender star absorption. Her star generation rate here is 20.4, which is definitely not bad. Her NP charge rate is 0.58. This is pretty much right around the average. Her NP charge defense is 3%. Her death rate is 21%, which is a little bit below average. She is lawful good, female gendered, has the basic traits of Intima Elish nullification, again, partially due to the fact that she's star. Immune to Pigify, humanoid, non-hominidae servant, and then in stages 1 and 2, she is both levitating and space flightable, as, those are kind of unique traits as well. So taking a look at the deck here, you guys can see she actually has double buster, double arts, and a singular quick card. Realistically speaking, all the hit counts are average or better, with the quick card especially being, at 5 hits, 2 above average, and the buster cards being 1 above average at 4 hits. It's not super imperative that they be, but definitely you're going to be wanting to try and land buster crits with Arcueid, especially if you're running her alongside someone like Koyanskaya. So that's definitely going to be a thing I think you'll see a lot of people do. Now, talking about the actual deck in terms of what it has to offer you for carding, yeah, having that second arts card is going to make it a little bit more beneficial to you in terms of being able to, again, get back to a noble phantasm and stuff on its own. But you're really, again, in a Koyanskaya type setup, going to want the buster cards, not only because they're going to crit, they're also going to especially with Korean Sky's second skill, be able to generate, force charge based off of that. But you don't have to use her with Korean Sky. It's just going to be sort of one of the more optimal choices if you're trying to get a lot of Buster synergistic crit damage out. But again, some of her carding mechanics here are actually going to deal with her extra attack. So again, it being a 5 hit and just kind of being average right now is okay. There's nothing concerning there. Taking a look at the active skills here, you guys can see the first one is going to have parties in P gauge by 30%. This already is just a huge clue into the fact that she could be used in a supportive aspect. Again, we have a lot of discussions nowadays about sort of multiple damage dealer type setups and running alongside maybe only 1 or 2 supports. This is definitely an interesting thing when your damage dealer can also act as a support. So Arcueid's going to function in that capacity. She can also here, because she increases the parties in P damage, provide some more support to that degree. This is up to 20%, and even more so due to the fact that she can increase the party's overcharge by 1 stage 1 time over 3 turns. So this is going to allow allow her to not only help other people out, but it's also going to allow her to function in somewhat of a invincible/immortal comp, depending on how you're trying to run that. If you're trying to run the Buster version alongside Castoria and Merlin, then obviously she would be a very nice synergistic fit, as she will have that extra sort of overcharge rank there. She's not going to have it tied to her NP like someone like Morgan would, and she is a single target damage dealer rather than an AoE necessarily, but that's just with her NP, so we'll talk about that more in a little bit here. The skill, however, is on a 7-turn cooldown, so if you want to double it up in a farming setup type deal, do understand this is going to mean that you're going to probably need her 5th append if you're trying to get back to it within the conventional 3-turn setup. Otherwise, you may just say, hey, it is what it is, and if I'm in a challenge scenario or a solo, I'll just get back to it when I get back to it. But again, it's something that you should be aware of. Taking a look at Arcueid's second skill here, it is an increase to her own arts and bush performance for 3 turns of 30% each down here. Each of these is going to be, again, nothing super stellar, but at least just a steroid for each of these 2 card types. It's going to affect 80% of her deck, so it's definitely a nice thing to see. You're also going to see, though, here that she basically will change her own extra attack to be able to hit all enemies for 3 turns. This is the same thing as Aoko's effect in that regard, as it's going to allow her to basically make her extra attack do AoE damage. And this is going to mean that depending on how you're handling things, especially if you're, say, following it up in NP, you might still be able to card it out and have sort of her extra attack finish enemies off. This is something that we really need to talk a little bit more about, and I'll talk about it after we get done with the kit. I have some numbers for you, and I want you guys to be able to see that so that you can understand kind of how this is going to work. Again, what it's trying to tell you, though, is that the damage and NP star generation per target is halved compared to single target attacks. What that means, if you are, let's say, attacking 3 different units, normally if you're attacking 1 different unit, it would do, let's say 1.0 times damage. Instead, it's going to do 0.5 basically to each one of these, rather than dealing 1.0 to 1. It's going to cut it in half, but deal it to everybody that you're targeting. That is an interesting thing there. It's going to do the same thing with the NP and star generation as well. And then again, you guys can see she does at least have an extra attack performance boost for 3 turns here by 100%, sort of trying to negate that capability there and allowing for her extra attack to still pop off. She's going to, from there, charge her own NP gauge by 20%. Do note, though, that this aspect does not scale with the skill. So in theory, you don't need to lower the skill just for the charge. You could definitely skimp on it if you want. But again, I'm going to say if you're going to be trying to use her for her carding mechanics and her AoE attack, you're definitely going to want to lower this skill just to have the boost to the extra attack there. All this is on a 6-turn cooldown, so it can't be doubled up on turns 1 and 3 in a Korean Sky setup. However, and do be careful with this, the extra attack change here is a unique buff. What does that mean? That means that if you double pop this skill, you will not get a second version of this buff. Meaning that at the end of that 3rd turn, basically, if you're popping it on turns 1 and 3, at the end of that 3rd turn, if the enemies aren't dead, your extra attack will lose the capability to deal damage to all other enemies, rather than you having a new buff overlapping that, allowing you, again, say like 2 more turns to do that. So be very careful. Again, if you try to double pop it, this is a unique buff. You will not get a second copy of the buff. Her third skill here is basically going to be a crit star bomb. As you guys can see, she's going to gain 15 crit stars. It's going to increase one ally's critical star absorption as well for 3 turns by up to 5,000%. So this does mean it's another supportive type skill, and it's very nice in the sense that it's 5,000%. This is enough to basically make even Berserkers and Avengers be able to soak the stars. So it's definitely really, really good even for your low star absorption classes. It's also going to grant the ally the critical star regeneration buff for 3 turns, which means it'll be located specifically on them. So if they die, you'll lose it. So just be aware of that. Again, 15 stars per turn there if you max it out. And it's going to increase the party's attack for 3 turns by 20%. So definitely another really, really nice supportive aspect here. From here, it's also going to increase the party's critical damage for 3 turns by 30%. So again, Arcueid is kind of just helping you power through. Do keep in mind, though, when we're talking about Arcueid herself and putting this on her, her extra attack cannot crit. So that's obviously something that, while yes, that's just kind of normal par for the course, something that you should denote that, like, yes, this will not be a super big benefit necessarily to that particular gimmick. But again, this skill is on a 6-turn cooldown if it's lured, so you can pop this on turns 1 and 3, meaning you do get this double attack boost to the party potentially, so you might again want to lure it if you're trying to get everybody carding quite well. Now, taking a look at her passive skills here, she gets Magic Resistance B just to give her some debuff resistance, Item Construction A to increase her debuff success rate, Territory Creation that has no actual effect, which is kind of funny, Independent action here, basically increasing her crit damage by an additional 10%. And then a really, really nice unique buff here, giving her 5 critical stars every single turn, just automatically without fail. And then increasing her, basically all her cards' performance except her extra attack by 20% if she happens to be on a darkness battlefield, or if somebody else changes the battlefield to darkness. You might be asking yourself, who could that be? Basically, there's only a couple units in the game right now that even can operate with Darkness Battlefield. Lohi is currently the only one with her first skill that can actively change it. But again, looking forward, there may be other units in the future, or the node itself may just have it naturally. So this could be something that you could play around and something that you could really take advantage of. With regards to her append skills, I think it is absolutely important to understand how Arcueid's going to work. Now remember, she got the 30% charge. That does mean that something like the second append mana loading would be potentially good for her, but she also has her second skill that has 20%, so she's functionally a 50% charger. In that regard, you might want to consider not doing this skill, but it's up to you, because again, you might be able to treat her as a 50% charger and start her out from a 30% standpoint if you're in the middle of an event that, say, maybe doesn't have an MLB CE with charge on it. Or again, you could just say, hey, I'm just going to take a 50%er and just operate that way and ignore this skill. The 5th append would be really nice for getting back to the cooldown on the first skill, since it's set at 7. Kind of an annoying aspect that they did that, but this is probably one of the reasons why. I don't like when the developers do sort of push you to getting the 5th append like this, but it is what it is, and it is sort of in line with Arcueid's original design with her original copy, given that she has a 7-turn cooldown on her charge skill there as well. Her first skill also bears worth mentioning, as again, this is extra attack performance by an additional 50%. It's not just NP Gen and Star Gen, it's also going to be damage. This could definitely function well with, again, that AoE attack that she will have. And again, her third append here being against assassin enemies. This, to me, is a non-starter. This is the absolute worst thing you could take for her. Given the fact that she is a pretender, she's really not going to be wanting to go up against assassins. The 4th append being the critical damage one, this could also help out your carding potential, depending on how you're trying to operate her. Take a look at her Noble Phantasm. It is a single target 5-hit Buster NP. As you guys can see, it deals damage to one enemy, seals their skills for 1 turn. Seals their NP for 1 turn. And basically from there increases her own extra attack performance by 50% for 1 turn. What does this mean? This means that obviously you're going to deal damage, and then you're going to want to try to combine the cards that she has to form an actual Brave Chain so that she can get the extra attack out on the same turn that she NPs. This way, you're going to actually be able to get that extra performance boost. It will only last for the duration of that NP turn, not into a subsequent turn. So they are sort of limiting you in that regard. You can't just sit here and stack these up, but admittedly, this is still something where you could have maybe had the second skill popped already and gained the benefit of this. You could have already had the first append as well, or maybe you've even double popped the second skill. You're on turn 3, and you sort of like all the stars line up for you, and you get that really nice Brave Chain with that extra attack. So again, it's something to consider that yes, like if you have the possibility to, you should probably try to chain it into a full-blown Brave Chain, but it does depend on the amount of damage you're going to be able to pump. Particular overcharge effect, she's actually got a really just disgustingly good lineup here, as she has multiple effects. The first one's going to deal super effective damage to enemies that are evil alignment. The second one is going to charge her own NP gauge, and the third one is going to further charge the NP gauge of living human allies that are not her. So what does that mean? So again, she gets the super effective evil damage. This will not apply to any of her carding. This will only apply to the NP, so it's not a power mod in that regard. It's just super effective. But again, super effective is really, really strong in terms of boosting the NP's damage. Charging after the NP and having it scale means she works like the saber faces that have charge in the back of their NPs, which does mean that, again, the overcharge mechanic that she has on her first skill, if you guys will remember that, it's one stage, one time for 3 turns. So basically, at least once somewhere in there, you're going to be able to get 25% basically refund instead of 20. But again, you can probably double pop it if you have the 5th skill there. Just keep in mind that I wouldn't necessarily rely on this. If you can get her to a second overcharge rank, though, that would at least be 30% to be a much better break point. It's definitely something to think about. And the charging of the living human NP gauge, except for herself, here are basically your living human units that are out there in the game. Do keep in mind, this is not necessarily the best list of people to pair her with, but Seal is an interesting choice, as well as maybe some of the other supports like Reigns or Waver, and even, you know, somebody out there basically like Alice or Mew. So there are other options here. You do have interesting capabilities, but admittedly, it's going to depend on the type of composition and situation that you're in. Now, with that in mind, let's talk about some craft essences. So basically, right off the rip, something like Black Grail should be possible, especially if you're going to be carding a bunch. But admittedly, this is going to favor her NP more and less her carding. So naturally, this is just going to be your strongest option. Rising Mudrain, on the other hand, is going to be, again, sort of the overcharge variant of Black Grail. This combined with her first skill, obviously, it's going to end up giving her quite a bit, as you would be sitting at 35% overcharge. Even without the first skill, you would still be looking at 30%. So that'd be a way to guarantee that you at least got 30% on that first sort of, again, NP out of the gate, and allow you to maybe get back to the next NP a little bit easier. Victor of the Mood could certainly be good for some of your carding applications. Wouldn't be the best for the extra attack and it being AoE because it's buster centric, but it does at least scale all attack. It is a 2400 scaling CE, which is the highest in the game. And again, it does have a ton of crit damage on it, so it's definitely a good one to consider. Golden Sumo can also be pretty decent. It is permanently available in JP's Mana Prism shop, and basically it has 2000 attack. It's basically going to be starting charge of 50%, as well as increasing your attack further by 15%. This will affect your extra attack and something that may be pretty decent for you. Honey Lake, on the other hand, here is going to be sort of your go-to invincibility pierce option. It is going to be markedly good because if you put burn command codes on Arcueid, you're going to be able to take advantage of a 40% power mod that will impact her carding and her extra attack. So definitely something to pay attention to if you can manage to get your hands on Honey Lake. But admittedly, for other units out there, there's just other options. Or again, if you maybe don't have Honey Lake, you maybe just say, okay, well, I maybe just need an invincibility Pierce C, and you take whatever the heck you have. So it's up to you, but these are sort of the best options that we can kind of give you for something like that. Okay. So, with that in mind, let's go ahead and I actually want to first talk about the extra attack damage because I feel like this is a little bit important to understand in her case. So again, I asked Avalon here to model for me some of the actual damage numbers. These are neutral numbers, so remember with a pretender, you're at least going to be effective against obviously your night classes. It's only that semi-effectiveness, right? But it is something to denote that you won't necessarily be like as neutral as some of the other extra classes are. So keep in mind here, this is an extra attack. We do have something like Black Grail equipped, but that's more just, hey, like it's level 100, you'd have the high attack power from it, but you wouldn't be getting any actual carding effect, right? And there is Man Niche here included because potentially you could be carding, in a Koyanskaya comp, and that's probably your most likely setup. But again, it may depend. Maybe you're in a multiple damage dealer type of option, and that is something that's very difficult for us to model, but it is something to consider. You might want to consider pairing her with units like Bunny Artoria, Seal herself, Summer BB, anybody that can facilitate carding and damage, Merlin as well, potentially. It's just totally up to you. So taking a look at this, you guys can see just neutral damage here, basically. You're still by wave 1. Your numbers are a little bit spicy in terms of this, but this is just the extra attack that's hitting. And so as a result, this is the amount of damage that's going to be dealt to basically everybody. And then certainly if you're following it up with an NP or something like that, you may be able to get a little bit more of a boost. But you can see this is just sort of your typical looping type situation. It is going to get stronger if you manage to be able to double up the skills. If you have the first append, it's going to boost it. Again, you can see that sort of like 50% bump there on some of it, but it's not like a complete 50% bump because you already have so many modifiers in play. So you're actually just getting what amounts to be, like 5 to 10k here in terms of difference. And then the Man Niche and other power mods can really help spice things up. Power mods are going to be really good for a carding unit as opposed to like super effective, as we mentioned before, where it's only going to apply to the NP. Also consider the fact that like color type buffs like your Buster Up and stuff do not affect the extra attack. So anything that's like actual attack up, defense down, or again, power mods, things that will actually interact with the extra attack are going to be to your benefit. So you can see you can make it manage to do a little bit more damage. We do have a confluence of factors here, the man attribute potentially, and even the first append there, and how much damage you could actually manage to make it do. So there is quite a bit of firepower here on the table, and this is still neutral. It's not even effective. So you could maybe modify this a little bit more. Maybe would have damage bonus in certain events, or maybe a damage CE flying around. So it's totally up to you to determine how you want to use this. And if you feel like she'd be a good unit for you to try and go for that sort of AoE extra attack there. Okay, now with that in mind, let's take a look at her actual sort of charge scenarios. I want you guys to understand this is not a multiple damage dealer setup. This is just her on her own. It's very difficult, as we mentioned before, to actually model the multiple damage dealer type setups because that just kind of opens the floodgates and really manages to like give us a ton of things, and I'd never be able to end the video essentially. So taking a look at this real fast here, you guys can see this is basically her with her fifth append. We're going to be utilizing something like Mud Rain, giving us that extra, again, sort of, how do you call it, like overcharge there. And essentially here, we're going to be running double Koyanskaya and someone like Reigns. Now, keep in mind, you could obviously run someone more than Reigns. It's just totally up to you. But basically, we can essentially start her out with her own 50% charge. That's both her first and her second skills. Another Koyanskaya 50% charge. That's going to be enough to let you fire off the first NP there. Then from there, she's going to refund 35%, as we already mentioned. So you're only going to need basically a 20% charge right here on this turn. So that's going to come from Reigns' second skill. You're going to go ahead and pop the other Koyanskaya charge skill. That right there is then going to bring you back up to 100% plus. You're going to fire off the NP one more time. And then you're essentially going to get back both the first and the second skill because you have the fifth append skill at least unlocked. And from there, you're going to end up utilizing the other 30% charge from Reigns, plus the refund you got off the back of that NP, and that should be enough for your final NP. Now, this does assume that you can either find a way to card through the wave otherwise, or that it's like a 1-1-1 type setup where she's just NPing. But again, it's totally up to you to determine when to use her in that regard. This is her with the 5th append, again, basically with no CE requirement of any sort. So now we don't have the overcharge mechanic, but basically we're just going to be using Oberon in this scenario, just to kind of make it a little bit easier, a little bit easier on ourselves. Going to start out with the 50%, again, with the 50% from Koyan. That's going to get wave 1 done for you. But then wave 2 here, it gets different as we get the 25% refund instead of 20, but also not the 35% from the prior version. From there, we're going to basically end up doing another 50% from Koyanskaya and 20% from Oberon, but we're now just 5% short. So basically, we're going to have another 20% here coming out of Arcueid, as again, you actually can get back to the second skill this fast if you've leveled the 5th append up at least 2 times, basically. Or sorry, leveled it up to rank 6 at least in order to get the 2 times bonus. And that's going to allow you to get back to it already by wave 2. So again, that's going to put you at 115. From there, you can fire off the NP one more time. That's going to get you 20% refund, and then she should get back to the first skill here. That's going to get her at 50%, and then Oberon's remaining 50% will secure sort of the bag for you and allow you to fire off the final NP. So again, that's how she would work in charging scenarios like here. Again, you might be able to make her work without append 5, but at that point, you may be looking at a starting charge CE. So again, something like Golden Sumo or maybe even Aerial Drive or Cranking. Any of those might be a decent option for her. Now, taking a look at her actual damage numbers here, you guys can see these are, again, going to be neutral numbers, but it's just self-buffs only. What does this mean? It means no support. So, like, again, no Merlin, no Koyanskaya, no Oberon. Nothing is actually included in this other than Arcueid herself and her own skills. So in that scenario, this is how much NP damage she would do against a neutral enemy. You guys can see it's base 52k here. Again, all the way up in MP5, going up to basically 87k. And then Darkness Battlefield giving you a little bit more scalability, so you get that 20% extra buster up there. Anti-Evil super effective modifier there, giving you quite a bit of firepower there. And then if you happen to be both on the Darkness Battlefield and against Evil, boom, there you go. Quite a lot of damage. And again, these are just neutral numbers under her own power, so these are very impressive numbers. To give you guys some context for that, I'm going to go ahead and show you the actual breakdown of her various capabilities. So your first option here is append 5 with double Koyan, Oberon, a level 100 Black Grail. Your second option here is basically going to be double Koyan without the 5th append and Oberon there. The third option here is going to be the exact same thing as the first option, just with Darkness Battlefield. And the second option is going to be, or sorry, the fourth option here is going to be the same as the second option here, but with the Darkness Battlefield. So I'm not going to bother to go through all of this with you guys, but just kind of going over the first one with you. Essentially here at NP1, you guys can see these are still neutral numbers, but they now include the actual support buffs. You can see decent numbers coming out there. Wave 1's obviously going to be your shottiest, but it really spikes by wave 3 if you manage to get to it. And especially there with the Evil super effective modifier there, nearly like, you know, like almost like 40% extra damage right there just off of that. So really, really strong. The man attribute here, you know, from Koyanskaya adding at least a little bit of firepower as well. And if you manage to have both, good God, that is just some disgusting good damage numbers. And all of that was just NP1. So NP2 numbers over here. Here you go. Basically NP2 with both niches in play by wave 3 is about 2 million neutral damage. So imagine that even being semi-effective at like a 1.5 times modifier, and like, good lord, that's going to start to be some disgustingly good damage. Now, again, basically looking at this without the 5th append, obviously at that point we're not looking at a 3-turn, we're instead looking at 1-turn bursts essentially for raw power. And here you guys can see sort of her one-shot damage, again neutral damage there at NP1. Definitely not bad. This is going to be utilizing all of Oberon's skills in 1 turn. So again, for something like maybe say a raid coming up on JP, this would definitely be an interesting number to pay attention to. And certainly, again, really good if you start getting to multiple damage, multiple copies here with her. So like I said, I do feel like Phantasmoon's damage is actually quite good. Just for comparison's sake here, I'm going to show you guys here is Seal's numbers. Essentially, as you know, some people are definitely going to have curiosity as to like how good is Phantasmoon in comparison to some of the other units that are out there that might compete with her. So Seal's going to be a lot more, I'd say, consistent on the carding application, unless you're soloing with Phantasmoon. But essentially, Seal here is going to be a little bit less in terms of the damage output. She does have still quite a bit of scaling capability here with the demonic niche, as well as the man niche being provided by Koyanskaya. But certainly, Phantasmoon ends up kind of being the better option. And with her being a pretender as opposed to a moon cancer, certainly if you're going up against something like an Avenger, that's going to be Seal's advantage. But if you're going up against, like, say, any of the night classes other than maybe an actual Saber, you've probably got an advantage for Phantasmoon there. Jalter is another one that I figured would probably be a decent comparison. She's also a single target. She's also got 50% charge. And you can see even Jalter's numbers kind of paling in comparison at this point, despite the fact that she has had that charge upgrade now. So Kentoki is another very interesting comparison. Even he is kind of overshadowed here. Now, with him being a Berserker, he will be at least 1.5 times effectiveness against basically everybody. So these are still just neutral numbers. So you can basically 1.5 times that. But yeah, essentially what you're kind of seeing here is that Phantasmoon is going to be one of your strongest single targets in the game in that regard. Now, that may change over time, but here you go. Here's the Hephaestion comparison. You can see basically at wave 1 here, we've actually got pretty comparable numbers at NP1, but pretty much by wave 4 there, you're looking in her optimal setup with a Black Grail at 425k. Compared against Phantasmoon here at 716. So it's almost double. Part of that is the Oberon and Buster synergy there, but the other part of that is just Phantasmoon is very strong and hard hitting in this regard. Having the ability to double up that source of NP damage, double up her attack up. Again, being able to synergize with Oberon, get that scalability if she operates with a Black Grail. All of that is going to be very, 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 very strong. So again, keep in mind, she's not a unit that you have to roll, but this is a unit that you guys should probably all be paying attention to right now. It's not a requirement, but she is going to be the game's first 5-star single target pretender. So, how do you guys feel about Phantasmoon? Which ascension for you is your favorite? And do you guys feel like she is somebody that you have your sights set on? Or again, do you think she's a pass in favor of looking towards something like New Year's coming up and maybe another potential collab unit in the future? Be curious to hear you guys' thoughts. Thank you guys for sitting through this one with me, and I will see you guys for the next one.